Hi, welcome. My name is Tim Garcia, and again, today's webcast is going to be standard logs made into actionable detect. It's going to be myself and Justin Henderson. So, Justin, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself, and then we'll continue on.
Cool. So, I am Justin Henderson. I'm the author of SEC 555, which we call SIEM with Tactical Analytics. I am a GSE, and I'm one of 13 in the world to be Cyber Guardian Blue and Red, which just means I dabble in both defense and offense. I currently have 58 industry certifications, which really just means I need to get a life. So for you guys, that's good because that means that I have no hobbies other than, I don't go do sports, I don't do anything. It's just me and Tim and other instructors geeking out. So that's how 555 came to be, and I'm super excited with how well it's already doing. So back to you, Tim.
Thanks, Justin. So my name is Tim Garcia. I'm an information security engineer. I work for a Fortune 100 financial services company in the United States. I am also a SAN certified instructor. I teach primarily on the cyber defense curriculum. So I teach 301, Introduction to Information Security, 401, Security Essentials, 501, our Enterprise Defender, 511, our continuous monitoring with security operation, and Justin has graciously allowed me to be one of our Security 555 instructors. And I'm really happy to be part of this. This is an outstanding class. I had an opportunity to sit in this class just a couple of weeks ago in Las Vegas, and Justin did an outstanding job, and I learned a tremendous amount. And one of the benefits of this class is that it also gives you, it's one of the only classes that SANS has that gives you 6 months worth of logs and labs to be able to play with, to learn from, and to continue on. And Justin also has done a tremendous amount of work in this course by giving smart videos. So one of the things that I love about this class is that Justin has put in hours and hours of work, and he's got high-tech videos which have closed captioning and just a tremendous amount of actionable information that you can use, so that way you can learn and you can go back and do the lab, and you can watch Justin explain the lab, and you can get even more beneficial information from it. So today's webcast is going to be specific to
Tim, we lost your audio.
I'm going to pick up why he's lost.
there we go.
There we go.
Can you hear me now? All right.
Yeah.
So we're sorry about that. So again, a copy of this talk is available at SMapper Presentations. Did you hear me give my introduction?
Yes.
Okay, great. And Justin also offers a tremendous amount of additional resources for the community at GitHub/HA Security Solutions. And this has a tremendous amount of different logs that you can use, or different code that you can plug right into Logstash and into Kibana to be able to generate some of these things we're going to be talking about. Now, this talk is not about bashing any specific SIEM solution or promoting one vendor solution over the other. What specifically we're going to be focusing on with this talk is how can we actually get the most out of our log? Now, all of us have SIEMs, or at least most of us probably have a SIEM, and I've actually fallen into this same problem before. So one of the things that we had is we used to have one of the major SIEM vendors in our environment. And after about 6 months, we started to notice that we weren't getting any actionable good information from our SIEM. And so what we normally do is we started to blame the vendor. Well, it's not us, it's them. The vendor's not providing us with what they needed. The proof of concept doesn't actually give us the necessary information, because now we're ingesting a larger amount of logs, and it's not what was advertised. And that's generally not the case. The vendor solutions, whether it's ArcSight or QRadar or Logarithm or Splunk or just choose your perfect vendor, is not the problem. The technology is solid. The problem tends to be is that we don't really know what we're looking for. So one of the things we're going to try to achieve with this webcast is how do we get more actionable information out of our log? Okay, a lot of us are frustrated with our SIEM solution, and as I said, we try to to blame the vendor. Okay, this often leads us to do the rip and replace. I'm going to get rid of this and I'm going to plug in a new one. And we did that. In my environment, we had a major, as I said, a major solution. We ripped it out, we replaced it, and we are starting to see some benefit from our new solution. However, that's more because of we really now start to understand our environment a little better. And we're starting to apply some of these techniques to actually get better context and better visibility into our network. And one of the goals of this is we're going to use this information to create actionable detects, things that can actually help us to detect the adversary. And this really is understanding what the adversary is doing, letting the offense inform the defense, and then using those attacker techniques against it. And one of the best things we can do is we can start to tune our SIEM for analysis. Most of our SIEMs are designed for data. What we really want to do is we want to design and we want to tune our SIEMs for analysis. We want to get better at understanding the environment and also going out and using it to perform in-depth analysis. Now, one of the best ways we can do this is by starting to do what we call enrichment. We all have infrastructure logs, whether it be DNS or HTTP, HTTPS, SMTP. And most of these logs are very high volume. They are a tremendous amount of information, and a lot of us collect these logs. Some of us may not, but those of us that are collecting these logs, a lot of times we're collecting them strictly for compliance, or maybe we're using it specifically for incident response. As I mentioned, these are generally high volume logs. There's a tremendous amount of information, and in some cases, they're not very useful. A DNS query doesn't give us a lot of actionable information. But if we can add some of these enrichment techniques, like giving baby domains or starting to do entropy tests, looking for high entropy domain names to identify things like fast flux or domain generating algorithms, or we can look for things within the certificate which generally shouldn't be there. For example, demographic information such as the city, state, and the location, or maybe if it's a self-signed certificate, or maybe a certificate that just was generated less than 24 hours ago. This is information that we can use because it does not look normal in our environment. And we're going to talk about some of these things like fuzzy phishing. Okay, we're looking for things that are generally not normal, things that are out of the ordinary. We're starting to apply some of these techniques for those of you that are Security 511 alum. Right, we're starting to get better actionable intelligence built into our SIEM so that we can play that suspicious, malicious, benign game. We find information, we tag it as suspicious, and then we use that to perform our analysis to determine whether it's malicious or whether it's benign. Okay, so for example, in my environment with fuzzy phishing, one of the things that we can do is we can look for very similar domains. And we're going to look at how we can do that. But for example, my organization is wellsfargo.com. So if I can go through and I can look at something like VVELLSfargo.com. Okay, now that looks very similar, but it's really easy to do with some of these techniques that we're seeing. Okay, so we take an ordinary log. We have a standard DNS query that looks like this, right? So www.google.com. And what we can do is we can take this log and turn it from ordinary into extraordinary. Okay, now we can start to break it up into our subdomain. We have www, we have our parent domain of Google, google.com. All right, we have a creation date. So now we know when this particular domain was created. So now if I have a domain that was created yesterday and we have a bunch of requests or several requests for several domains that were created within the last day, the last week, that is interesting to me. That is suspicious. That is something that I want to at least take note of and start to investigate. We can also use certain things like the top 1M. How many of your users in your organization generally tend to go out to domains that are not part of the top 1 million? Now, I'm sure it happens. I'm sure you have industry-specific domains, something that's specific to your particular organization, maybe partners or vendors that you go to that may not be the most popular 1 million websites on the internet. However, what we can do is we can then add those in to our list and we can whitelist those out. This allows us to take this tremendous amount of domain information and then start to filter it down so it can be very useful. Okay, so again, we can add in information like, the geo IP, the ASN. So again, I know that Google has a tremendous amount of different IP addresses. located all throughout the world. So maybe GeoIP, looking at what location or what particular geography that's coming from, may not be helpful. But if I can say, well, this IP address is associated with the autonomous system number for Google, I can say, well, I guess I'm going to trust Google. If it's coming for Google, I'm going to trust it. Well, maybe that's not necessarily okay because, you know, with things like cloud services and things like that, maybe someone's using a particular cloud instance in Google to attack me. But let's say it's Microsoft and it's not Azure. So if it's not Microsoft Azure, I can trust that certain domains are going to be trustworthy and I can filter those out. Now instead of having to parse through 10,000 logs, I'm only parsing through 1,000 logs. I can use these techniques to start to filter down the amount of information I have. Another one is frequency score. You see here we have a tag or a field called frequency score of 18.277. This means that Google is not a high entropy domain. This looks like a word. This looks like something that we are aware of. Okay, so it's something that looks normal that someone would type into a domain name. Okay, now I know what you're thinking. I've never seen the field frequency score in my DNS record or my SIEM. Where did that come from? Well, we actually had freakserver.py. So our course author for Sec 573, shout out to Mark Baggett, our author of our Python class. He actually wrote a system or a Python script called freak.py. So I remember this was a couple of years ago. I was sitting in Security 511 with Mark and Seth Mesner, and we were actually talking about this technique of looking for high entropy domain names. And Seth was saying, you know, he's not aware of any tools that can do this for you, but if you start to look and analyze the domain names from your bro logs or from your, you know, maybe some of your DNS logs, and you see domain names that are like QXY3, you know, QXYZXV, that does not look like a normal domain name. And before the end of the day, Mark whipped out his Python foo and he created freak.py. And he said, now all you have to do is submit the domain name to this Python script and it's going to give you a score. And the higher the score, the less entropy that's associated with it. So now if I have a very high score, what I can do is I can set a clipping level and I can say if the score is less than, let's say, 6, then I can say I want to alert or I want to analyze or tag that particular piece of information as a high entropy domain name. And now then I can use that to then tune my SIEM for analysis. I can go out and say this particular domain name looks to be high entropy. And then I can go and do some further investigation, some further analysis, and I can build that out so that way I can say, okay, I'm filtering out anything that's a frequency score of greater than 10, let's say. So if it's greater than 10, I'm going to filter that out and I'm going to ignore those because I assume those are, they may not be legitimate domains that I want to go to, but I know that they're not high entropy. So they're not someone that's trying to, as I said, do something like use a domain generating algorithm, a DGA, or someone that's trying to use something like FastFlux, where I'm changing the domains very frequently and I'm generating these automatically randomly generated domain names. Now, what Justin did is he said, okay, well, this freak.py score tool is outstanding, but now I want to do this at scale. Can you actually turn this into a server that I can actually make a call to over, you know, an HTTP request using something like curl, or within your Logstash config based upon the screenshot, I can make a call to a server that's sitting there listening on a particular port, and then I can submit to it a domain name. So using those enrichment techniques we saw before, I can send it the highest registered domain of google.com, and then I can use that to then apply that particular score to it. Okay, now this allows us to start to play that game. We start to filter out and we say, okay, now this looks suspicious. Now I want to conduct my analysis to determine whether it's malicious or whether it's benign. So again, because we love Mark so much, we actually went back to him. And Justin said, Justin was actually the driver for this. Justin went to Mark and he said, hey, Mark, you did such an outstanding job with FreakServer. I'd like to do some additional analysis using domain stats. So I'd like to look at some additional domain information. Okay, so with domain stats, this allows us to pull out who is information from my DNS information. So I can look at when was this domain actually created? When does this expire? What is the particular Is it part of the top 1 million, either using Alexa or Cisco Umbrella? I can pull against a particular list of the most popular domains and determine whether or not this is part of that 1 million or whether this is something that very few people on the internet actually go to. Because if it's a website that very few people go to, that's interesting to me. The majority of my users are going to the same websites over and over and over and over again. They're going to Microsoft. They're going to Google. They're going to Amazon. They're going to SANS.org. And these are all within the top 1 million. Now, as I mentioned before, it's possible that you have a particular domain that is not in the Cisco top 1 million. You have a domain that, you know, is maybe industry specific to you. Okay? But what you can do is you can then take that domain once you've identified it as a normal, legitimate domain for your organization, and you can add it to this list. And now I can then whitelist that off. And now I'm taking all of these high volume DNS information and I'm filtering it down and I'm cutting away about 90% of my particular things that I know are good. And now I'm essentially not having to dig through a needle in the haystack. What I'm doing is I'm moving the haystack and just digging through the needle. So again, think back to our goals of this webcast. We want to make the most out of our logs. We know that DNS information is high volume. We know that it's a lot of information to parse through. But now what I can do is I can use something like domain stats and I can filter out all of the domains in which I feel are top 1 million. Now, just because the domain is in the top 1 million doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that should be viewed by your organization. Unfortunately, there's a lot of pornography websites that are in the top 1 million. There's a lot of websites in which maybe policy violations for your organizations that are part of the top 1 million. You may not want to allow your users to go to YouTube, and YouTube is definitely in the top 1 million. So again, just because it's in the top 1 million doesn't necessarily mean that it's authorized in your environment. However, what we're looking for with this particular technique is to start to identify evil. Okay, if someone goes to YouTube, they may not necessarily be evil. Yes, it's a policy violation and we want to block that. However, you probably have other solutions that do that, right? You're going to be doing that at your proxies. You're going to be doing it through your next-gen firewalls. What we're looking to do is we're looking to identify evil actors that are trying to use domain things like, you know, some type of domain tunneling, DNS tunneling techniques, where they're generating a randomly generated domain name that is brand new, has a self-signed certificate that was generated within the last 24 hours. These are the techniques that can help to identify those types of activities. Or maybe I have a domain, a DNS domain that doesn't expire, or a certificate that doesn't expire for 10 years. Domain stats can help us to create that type of information. Okay, so again, with just a few techniques, we can start to get better in visibility into our environment. Okay, now as you see graphically, as you see here, we have the same set of logs that were collected between 20:30, 8:30, and 10:30 at night. And once we apply a filtering of removing all those top 1 million, we've actually reduced about 90% of the logs that we have to analyze. Now, one of the other techniques we can do with this is we can start to look and we can go and say, okay, well, compared to internal versus external, what is the percentage of logs of DNS requests that are internal versus external? The majority of our DNS requests are going to be internal DNS requests. So I can then filter out another 80 to 85% of my DNS records by just looking at only external requests, looking for C2, command and control, looking for domain-generated algorithms, DGA, looking for specifics of someone that's trying to do DNS tunneling. Now I can then parse this down to another 90%, and now, as I said, we're instead of trying to dig through that needle in the haystack, what we're doing is we're moving the haystack, and now all I have to dig through is the needle. Now, some of those needles may be clean, some of those needles may be dirty, but if I only have to look through 10 needles, I can easily identify the clean needles versus the dirty needles. Okay, so if I'm not in, if I want to filter out even more, I can start to say, I want to ignore all internal DNS requests, and I only want to focus on the external. Because yes, I may miss some things like internal DNS recon, but again, I'm not as concerned with that as I am about these other types
There, we just lost Tim again. He'll be back on in a second. But basically, we can see here, just by applying a quick filter of looking or not looking at the top 1 million, we have some very, very powerful capabilities. It's changing the logic of your SIEM to drive analysis versus just being compounded by massive amounts of data. Tim, you back on?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
I get a little excited when I'm talking about this stuff because it just geeks me out. So I accidentally hit the mute button on my phone. So I apologize for that. And another activity we have here is fuzzy phishing. Okay, and as I said, if you look at the screenshot here, one of the things you can do is you can look for similar domains. Oftentimes what an attacker attempts to do is they'll send an email, and again, this happens quite a bit in my organization. I work for Wells Fargo. We see all the time, VVELLS Fargo.com or WE11SFargo.com. Or again, there are just so many different iterations and we actually spend a lot of money, a lot of time looking for these similar domains. We actually go out and we purchase these similar domains. But if I'm trying to phish someone as part of a pen test, I'm going to send in an email to your organization that is coming from VVELLSFargo.com. And it may look legitimate coming in as part of the email, but when you, again, if you do a quick cursory look at it, you're like, oh yeah, that's WellsFargo.com. Or what if I just do wellfargo.com? Is that going to trick someone if I go in and I register that domain and I create an email address of wellfargo.com, then I get someone to trick and click on that email because it looks legitimate. It's coming from Tim at wellfargo.com instead of Tim at wellsfargo.com. And because they know me, they're like, oh yeah, I know Tim. That's probably legitimate. But because it's off by one, it's going to be more likely to be clicked on, and someone's going to be more likely to use that particular information to target an internal adversary or internal user. So what if I have good understanding of my normal environment, what I can do is these fuzzy, searching for fuzzy phishing. So if you look at the screenshot here, one of the things we can see is that we're looking from domain HASecurity-solutions.com tilde. So what this tilde says is that look for similar requests as HASecurity-solution.com. Now, in the class, we actually show it and demonstrate that we have several requests from HASecurity-solution without the S, and this actually takes all of that information and then boils it down, and now we have 2 hits. Instead of looking through all of my requests, I'm now looking at just 2 hits. And now it boils that up right to the top, and that jumps out like, it jumps out dramatically to your organization because now I see just those requests that are very similar. This is extremely effective against phishing domains. And now if we can target, again, if someone's trying to phish you, we can combine that with an alert. Now I can get real time, not exactly real time, but I can get information that says, hey, this is potentially suspicious activity that we're seeing. Someone's trying to phish me. And now I have this request that's coming in, and an SMTP record says, look, this looks very similar to our domain. Now I want you to alert and begin to investigate. Now, it doesn't work as well with DNS because oftentimes I've been guilty of this, and I do this all the time. I will fat finger my DNS request, and so I'll put wellfargo.com. However, this works very well with things like SMTP logs to generate potentially suspicious activity. Okay, now another incredibly useful technique and often underutilized is endpoint analytics. Now, I know what you're thinking is that this is way too much information. Okay, this is just going to be, I can't monitor the endpoints because I can barely keep up with my 3,000 servers or my 5,000 servers. How am I going to possibly deal with all of my 100,000, 150,000, 60,000 endpoints? Well, again, one of the things we can do is start to get better visibility and look for specific things that are good indicators of adversarial attack. Okay, a lot of times the emphasis is, when we look at endpoint analytics is, what security product am I using? Am I using EPO, or am I using, Symantec or McAfee, or whatever my security solution is, and focus on, well, what can they provide for me? Okay, or, I'm looking at my IDS or my IPS, and I'm focusing just on that. And I'm not really looking at the desktops or the laptop information. Okay, but again, a few techniques can start to give us some very actionable information, and we can look for things like long command lines, right? Malicious PowerShell use. Now, PowerShell is one of my favorite tools. I love PowerShell, and I know Justin does as well, because it's very effective for being able to audit and administer my environment. I can use PowerShell as a blue team or as a defender to identify malicious activity by, looking at the event log, or by parsing out specific information, converting it to JSON, and then sending it right into my SIEM. I can use it to send information from my local Windows machine to another event collector that I can then use it to parse out, filter, and enrich these activities. But the adversaries also love PowerShell, because they know that it exists on just about every machine on your environment, every Windows machine at least, and in some cases even on other systems. And they know that it's generally authorized. It's whitelisted, so if I can sneak my attack through PowerShell, I can start to go through and evade your IDS, evade your endpoint protection techniques, because it can invade your whitelisting technologies, because it's just PowerShell, and that's an authorized program. So one of the things we can do is we can start to look at the endpoints. We can start to look at certain things like service creation gone bad. Now, most of these attacks, when we see them, they will actually generate a new service, and that's the event ID 7045. And these service names do not look like normal service names. If I'm using something like Meterpreter, it's going to randomly generate a service name. As we can see from the screenshot here, service name PWBKZDLUJEIXBH. Does that look like a normal service name? No. Now, I know what you're thinking. Those of you that have used Meterpreter, you're like, well, I can configure that. I can call it SVC host, or I can call it XYZ. I can call it iExplore. But generally, the adversaries aren't doing that. They don't believe we're looking for them, so they don't even bother to do that. And a lot of times, the Meterpreter will just generate it for you. And if I can find these types of things, I can actually look for these high entropy service names by looking at my event ID 7045 for a new service creation request, and I can identify that information. Now, you also see from the screenshot, this particular command is using PowerShell with no profile, hidden PowerShell request. And again, these are indicative of not normal activities within PowerShell. Also, what you may also see here, it's hard to read, but if you look down at the bottom right-hand corner here, you see the location in which PowerShell is running for. syswhile64 Windows PowerShell. PowerShell normally runs from C Windows System 32. And again, a lot of this requires you to have good understanding of your environment, because when I look at this, I can say, well, these are some things that then jump out like a sore thumb. A randomly generated service name. PowerShell running with no profile with the hidden window. Running from syswhile64 as opposed to Windows System 32 Windows PowerShell. These are good indicators that someone is trying to use PowerShell in a malicious way. Or maybe it's some type of automated program like Metasploit that's actually kicking this off and randomly generated from these common locations. The bottom event shows a privilege escalation where we see something like a name pipe request. Another service creation gets created, and it's created through name pipe. So if I do, for example, I'm doing a local exploit where I'm using bypass UAC event viewer, this is going to give me a name pipe escalation to get system request. So a lot of times, often when I compromise a system as part of a pen test, that user doesn't have the privileges in which I need in order to complete my task, or to dump passwords, or to dump the token. So what I need to do is I need to do a privilege escalation in order to elevate my privileges. And that cuts a service event log, right? A new service created, and it's a randomly generated service through the name pipes technique. And if we're looking for these things, we can start to filter out and look for those specific service creations and say, okay, let me whitelist these ones, and let me see these ones that look suspicious. And again, we play that malicious, suspicious, benign game. Another thing that's been added to Windows PowerShell is we can now start to look for new process creating, 4688, or if we're doing some additional techniques with version 5, we can also do script block logging that allows us to get a 4104 event. Now, this allows us to show every particular script, block of script that is actually executed. Now, it's pretty verbose, but it allows us to get good information into our environment, right? We're seeing PowerShell, running with no profile. We're invoking, you know, an expression to do new object. And again, this is better actionable information that we can use to gain better visibility into our network and understand that this is what the adversaries are doing. They're doing things like base 64 encoding their PowerShell command. And they're doing this to evade our endpoint protection suites, our antivirus, our anti-malware. Because if they can encode it, then they're not going to match any particular signatures that we already have identified. But what we can do now is use that technique against them. Because how many of your PowerShell scripts that you write legitimately are your administrators and your auditors and your end users base 64 encoding the command? Very few of them, if any. So now what I can do is I can use this technique and I can look for long command lines. I can look for base 64 encoded. I can look for hidden PowerShell windows that are being created. Now, again, there may be legitimate reasons for doing this. However, what we do is we can filter out and look for just those particular types of activities and say, okay, now I start to play that suspicious, malicious, benign game. Anytime I see PowerShell running with a hidden file with no profile, or with the hidden window and no profile, that may not always be evil. But I would say a large percentage of the time it is evil. And so now those can be good indicators that we can start to look for to identify those types of activities that are normally adversarial. Another thing to do is oftentimes we have logs that are not very easy to read and easy to understand. So one of the things we can do is we can actually start to use third-party products to get our logs in a better, easy to understand environment, like CSV or some other format that makes it easier to parse out, easy to analyze. So Nearsoft USB DView is a third-party tool that can take your information based upon when USB devices are plugged into your environment and then put that log into a better, easy to read, understandable environment. And then I can send that over to my SIEM, and now it's in a format that's very easy for me to parse. Because when I plug in USB, there are different log events get cut. And they're not always the same. Not always the same logs get cut, depending upon whether this is the first time I plugged in that USB, or it's the second time or the third time. Different log events get cut. USB DView from Nearsoft allows us to take that log information and be able to parse it out and put it into a format that's easy to read, easy to understand. Now, using a third-party tool like this, obviously there's some risk associated with that. We have to make sure that it's allowed to run on our systems, right? It's no longer real time, so we want to make sure that we test and make sure that this is authorized and it's going to give us a good return on investment. But we did want to introduce it to you to say that oftentimes one of the things you may need to do to get better actionable intelligence and actionable detectable information is to use a third-party software, piece of software like USB DView. Now, another thing we can do, and one of my favorite things to do, is I do this right now with my SIEM, and I'm not using the one we use in class. I'm not using the ALK stack. I'm using a tool called QRadar, and I love QRadar. It has its good and its bad, and I'm actually took a lot of Justin's recommendations, and I'm figuring out how can I actually do that in QRadar. And that's one of the benefits of this course, is that, yes, we talk about the ALK stack, and we show you how you can do this with Elasticsearch and Logstash and Kibana, but what we're really trying to do is focus on what are the techniques that we can use to start to find the bad guy. And I've taken this particular technique and I've implemented in my SIEM because there's tools that can do this. But if I'm going out and I'm looking for object access auditing, now when I say that, oftentimes a lot of you probably sit there and you shake a little bit and you get a little scared and you say, did he just say object access auditing? And you start to imagine mountains of logs just falling all over and landing on top of you. And that is possible. But what I'm going to do this in a very specific manner. I'm going to go out and create a couple of files in various locations within my file server, and I'm going to place that information in strategic locations. And I'm going to create a use case in my SIEM is whenever event ID 4663 gets cut for this particular folder, for this particular file, then I want to generate an alert. Now this allows me to find automated malware that's going to walk my data store. when an adversary compromises one box, that box generally doesn't have the information that they're looking for. So it requires them to then walk the data source. But first they have to identify what information exists on this system or what information is accessible from the system. So if I have a user that clicks on a link and gets popped, that user gets compromised. Okay, I'm upset about that, but generally I don't care that much. Because that, hopefully, if I have good asset inventory, I have good procedures and policies in place, I have limited my privileged access, that one user, that one machine, that one laptop doesn't have access to all of the sensitive data within my environment. However, the adversary needs to identify what information that particular system has. So what they're going to do is they're going to walk the data store. So if I create a couple of folders on my file servers in various locations throughout my network, and I limit the permissions on them, but I actually set up object access auditing on those systems, and then any interaction with that directory, with that file, is now suspicious, right? At worst, it's a user that goes out and actually is curious and does something wrong. And then even in that case, I want to know about that, because I want to go and I want to talk to that user and say, why did you access this particular file? Why did you access this folder? This is not part of any project you're doing. This is not part of anything that's necessary for your job. So again, it allows me to train them and to give them information. But better yet, I'm going to find automated malware, automated scripts that are going in, walking my data stores, looking for different types of information. And then I can pop that right into my SIEM, and I can find that automated malware. Okay, also one thing that commonly happens is going out and looking and enumerating group and user membership. An adversary wants to know what members or what users and what groups I have on my system, and what users are members of sensitive and privileged groups like domain admins. One of the things I can do is going out and looking for event ID 4662, I can actually go out and audit for that type of access. So anybody that's trying to enumerate domain membership and group membership, I can cut a log, because again, all that is a resource, and I can turn on object access auditing for that particular resource in the domain. And I can identify when someone's trying to go out and enumerate user activity, group activity, and figure out what users are members of one group. And that turns me right into a particular good information that I can use as actionable text to find better information in my environment. Okay, so those are some techniques. I'm going to turn it over to Justin now, who's going to continue on and give you some additional information, and additionally, he's going to give you hopefully a couple of demos that we can use to gather some additional information. Justin?
Yep. So, let's go back. So basically the whole time, just thinking about this, 555 is a SIEM class. It's SIEM agnostic. The focus is really on how to catch the bad guys. It's not on all these million different ways of collecting data. You know, central log collection is kind of what SIEM has become. Everything Tim has talked about so far is just a different mindset of how to use the SIEM to catch the bad guys. This technique in particular, which I call Halo, this kind of kept me up all night, because I'm thinking adversaries constantly are using public information. Like, they're looking at your Facebook, they're looking at your GitHub, they're looking at LinkedIn. They're using this against us, and quite frankly, that seems unfair. So I got to thinking about this. I was like, you know, it's 2 a.m. in the morning, and I can't sleep. There's got to be a way to use this against them. And what I came up with was honey tokens against leveraging open source intelligence, or Halo, like the video game. And what I did is this, for a proof of concept, is I set up a fake user called Peter Parker, which, if you know, is Spider-Man, because I love Spider-Man. So P. Parker at sec555.com exists on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Adobe. He has a PGP key. He has GitHub, all this stuff. And the concept is simple. It's this. If I'm going to attack you, I'm going to use automated tools and manual analysis to pull back email addresses, user information, all of this, and I'm going to target your organization with it. Well, if I do that, at some point you're going to see Peter Parker's trying to log into, say, your Outlook web access. or maybe your SSL VPN. And now it allows the SIEM to use this as an early indicator that someone's attacking you. Now, you can't necessarily do something about them directly unless you're the government, but that's an early indicator to get ready and to start game planning. Again, it's just using your SIEM in a different way. Another way is, if you think about it, your SIEM has lots and lots of data. Specifically, one of the data sources I love is NetFlow, because NetFlow can catch a lot of things. But the problem is we have a lot of this compromised systems that are phoning home. They have C2, command and control. This is phoning home maybe every 30 seconds, maybe every couple of hours, maybe once a day, maybe randomly. And the problem is, it's easy to see if those were the only logs you were looking at. But if you're looking at it with millions of other logs, or really more likely billions or even a higher number, it's hard. And so Austin Taylor, who's one of the guys that works with me, he wrote this tool called Flare. And what it's doing is it's simply crawling a SIEM database, in this case Elasticsearch, using flow records to automatically identify those type of beacon behavior. Now, it's not perfect in that you're still going to find things like SSL VPN connections, websites that use keep alives. There's still some filtering you have to do, but it's a technique in the tool belt. And again, if you go back to what Tim covered, I'm going to show this again real quick. Back here on this slide. If we are doing log enrichment, basically if we're starting with basic fields and adding all this other stuff in, I could say, show me all beacons, but hey, ignore Google, ignore Microsoft, ignore Facebook, ignore the top 1 million. Maybe ignore things that are not random. When you combine these techniques, all of a sudden things get really powerful. So it's changing the way we view our data. And here's a little bit of a mind shift. Unfortunately, most of us spend easily 90% of our time on collecting logs. You know, you might have hundreds of data sources. I've worked with organizations that have thousands of data sources. That is painful, and it's quite frankly, if you bought a SIEM to catch the bad guys, it's a waste of time. You're spending so much time collecting data that you're not doing analysis. And we need a switch. So I wanted to make sure I shared a few techniques I do to help make this more efficient. And the trick here is automation. We need to find ways to automate data collection. That way we can focus our time on detection rather than maintaining our SIEM, because it turns into this evil beast. So one way I did this is writing a PowerShell framework, which is at this GitHub address, that automatically sets up and deploys a log agent called nxlog. And I don't care, this isn't me necessarily promoting nxlog. I feel it's a fantastic log agent. This could be the same concept for something like Beats, even some of the older syslog agents. I don't care. Anything that has a plain text configuration file, you could basically script it up to automatically install itself and configure itself. Now, follow me for a second here. I know it's late, but if you had a system, let's say it's a Windows file server, and someone came up behind you and installed a web server on it, what are the odds you have the logs for the web server? Now, they didn't submit a change ticket, they just installed it. You've not been notified. And on every organization I've worked for, they might have the file server logs, but not the web service logs. So part of what this framework is doing is it runs through checks once a day. It'll say something like, hey, is IIS installed? If yes, configure nxlog for every single site on IIS. There could be 1,000 sites, and it's going to dynamically configure them all for logging in the same fashion that's needed by your SIEM. And it goes through all these modules. Is SQL installed? Is DNS installed? So on and so forth. So now you can push out this framework, and it is automatically going to set up the logging you need on the endpoints. So this is more of a way to automate traditional agent deployments. Now, this works great, but if you're stuck with your SIEM agent, you might not be able to do much with it because you might have to maintain it from their own management suite. So a different way and a more next-gen way I really like is this. This is getting away from the log agent, at least as we traditionally do it. You're not going to do this entirely, but we can do this for a lot of things. Specifically, you have DNS logs, you have SMTP logs, you have web server logs, you have things like Kerberos, DHCP. And today, you probably have an agent or you're doing syslog on all of those systems, which means if you have say a Windows DNS server, that's one data source for 2003, 2008, 2016, all of those, they're different data sources because the log format's different. If you have web servers, I'm willing to bet you have IIS, multiple versions, Apache, multiple versions, Nginx, Tomcat. All of these traditionally have to be separate data sources because the log format is different. Now, if we get away from log agents and log collection, the traditional method, we can flip over to network extraction. What this is putting a sensor on your network and mirroring data to it. Think of this as what you would do for like an IDS, but this isn't an IDS. This is a network monitor sensor. This could be with a tool like Bro is my favorite, or PacketBeat. Basically, they sit there and monitor network connections and they generate logs. Because quite frankly, if you do an NS lookup or a DNS request versus a Windows server or a Linux bind, DNS is DNS. It follows the same RFC, it's in the same format. Bro sees that across the wire and it generates a neutral log. I've had organizations where they have over 100 different types of web servers. We slap a Bro sensor on the network and all of a sudden they have a single HTTP log that is universal for all of their web servers. It's a thing of beauty and it saves you tremendous amounts of time. It also picks up data sources you didn't know exist because quite frankly, we don't have 100% asset control. There's too many data sources. So I guess the whole goal of here is we want to show you different ways of thinking of your SIEM. Specifically getting away from constantly collecting data and more in getting into data analysis. That is what 555 is. Oddly enough, we have 5 days of teaching and 1 day of capture the flag or defend the flag. Of those 5 days, we spend probably 4.75 days talking about non-security related logs, such as Windows endpoints, Linux, DNS, SMTP, NetFlow. And the reason being is those standard log sources, when used tactically, give us a much higher chance at catching the bad guys than if we were just centrally collecting our security products. And that's a lot of times what we're using our SIEMs for. So what Tim was covering early on, combined with these log collection techniques, we can shift away from just pure play log collection and actually focus a bit more on analysis. Now, we have just a little over 10 minutes left in our talk. Real quickly, I just want to show something fast, and then we'll open for Q&A. Specifically, we'll just do a quick one. So here I'm just starting Logstash, and I'm running this file. This is confusing, so don't worry about this too much. But basically, what I'm showing you is how at scale we can do all these techniques that Tim talked about earlier. If I were to do a single log, so this contains a single DNS record, you can see here, I've got my open source SIEM collecting in a DNS log for, I'm gonna shrink that a little bit so you can see it better, for sec55.com, and it's pulling back automatically a frequency score, creation date for the domain links. It's pulling back all this additional information because I've told it to. Now, when Tim was talking about frequency server and domain stats, some of you were probably thinking, I can't get that to integrate with my system. The truth is, you probably can, because almost every SIEM vendor supports a way to do like a REST style call from your log aggregator. So I've been able to successfully implement these, and it scales super, super fast. And it's designed to use memory caching, so even if you were to do massive amounts of logs, it will handle them at scale. So we're able to take a normal log and enrich it significantly, and now we can focus on analysis. So here I'm feeding it multiple logs. The performance of it is actually limited mostly by the speed of my laptop. I've got this in multiple production environments, and we're having things like top 1 million tagging, which we see. Let's scroll up and find one here real quick. Dum, dum, bum. Sorry, a lot of these records are not actual domains. Let's see here. Come on. Let me run that again. I'll just stop it early on. Actually, I think it's supposed to be that one. So what you're going to see is we'll have, if a domain is in the top 1 million for Alexa, it'll get tagged. If it's not, then it doesn't have the tag. If it's not in the top 1 million, that's when it's going to do additional things like look at the domain creation date and so on. There we go. See if I can find one here. So you can see here, like this is test.int. That doesn't have a tag of top 1 million because it's not in the top 1 million. Here we go. Google.com is a top 1 million site. Here we go. So log enrichment plays a huge factor in being able to do analysis. And it's an area where most SIEMs are way being underutilized. So I love these kind of techniques, and I can't stress them enough. They don't take a significant amount of performance away from your SIEM, yet they help us do analysis and specifically filtering dramatically. We didn't talk too much about filtering out logs. 555 actually spends a significant amount of time showing you how to filter out noise. So like you can collect logs from your 100,000 endpoints at scale because you don't need all logs, you just need tactical logs. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open up for question and answers. We'll go from there. Let's see here.
Hi, this is Carol. I'll go ahead and step in. I'm not sure if Ruby's having trouble unmuting. I don't see any questions currently.
So if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat window. We'll go ahead and try to take a few questions. And if need be, I can stay over to answer some questions.
So we've got some comments of great presentation. Someone says, Splunk will of course love to convince people to log all the things. I'm not sure if that's a comment. And have you used these techniques with that?
Yes, Splunk is capable of interfacing with tools like Freakserver, domain stats. Again, most SIEMs can do it. It might not be easy, and some of the documentation sometimes seems hidden, whether that's a call to try to get you to engage for professional services or what, I don't know. But most SIEMs can interface with these. Some of the enrichment is not advanced. Doing things like a length check, every SIEM can do natively.
Okay, people are asking for the links that
Here's where we're going to copy the presentation after this. I'll upload it shortly.
Someone says, do these scripts scale using Splunk for auto lookups at search time instead of enriching prior to storing your Logstash example?
Yep, so you can do it either or. Splunk has a preference for doing lookups after the fact. I've kind of like to do it up on the ingest. That way the performance doesn't hit the search at the end. But it doesn't matter. The focus is on getting the job done so we can catch the bad guys. And if that's how you can handle it, there's no problem with that. That's totally cool.
Okay. Next question is, most of the protocols are moving to SSL. what are your thoughts on how to have readability with things like HTTPS?
Yep, so encryption is scary because it blinds a lot of our security tools we have today. We actually have an entire section on day 2 of this class to deal with SSL and X509, because a lot of times restrictions come into play where we're not allowed to do things like SSL inspection. Yet, if you can distribute a tool such as Bro for network monitoring, or you have a next-gen firewall, many times you can still see the certificate exchange on the wire. You can't see what's happening. Like, I'm not going to see credit cards and passwords, but I can see the SSL certificate itself. That alone, very much so, can be used to catch malware, command and control, because they break normal use of SSL. Things like, sorry, real quick here, the invalid fields where Tim was talking about, like if we have a city or provinces, countries, they'll have invalid data, such as a country code of XX instead of US or any of those. So the certificate information can actually be used against the attackers.
And also the DNS information is almost always in the clear, even if you're doing SSL. Those DNS requests are going to go in clear across, and so these enrichment techniques will still work. At least on the DNS information. And again, DNS is one of the most beneficial logs we can take advantage of and apply these enrichment techniques. I know that Justin mentioned that if he had only one log source that he could use, he would always choose DNS because it's such a ripe with a lot of information that you can use to find the bad guys.
Absolutely.
Okay, our next question is, in your personal opinion, are you leaning towards using ELK or Graylog as the open source log management / SIEM?
Sure, so I'll take this question because it was specifically open source versus open source rather than open source versus commercial. If it was open source versus commercial, I'd say I don't care, I just want to get the job done. But ELK versus the Elastic Stack versus Graylog, I lean heavily towards the Elastic Stack. And the reason being is Graylog seems to be much easier to stand up and get going. But when I want to get fine-grained and do deep tuning like I do with Logstash, I can just get much more granular with the Elastic Stack.
Okay. Have you seen JA3 profiles the SSL connection?
Yeah, so the JA3 actually has Bro integration now, and that's a good point. That is using a specialized fingerprint to detect malware use of SSL. We don't have it in here just because there's so limited time, but yes, that is awesome. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, I don't think there are any other questions. We have many people expressing their thanks to you guys for doing this presentation. Do you have any final comments?
Yeah, actually, so I know this is for APAC, but we are having a special SIEM summit late in November. It is going to be the first ever SANS SIEM summit that's designed entirely for using log collection and log tools to catch the bad guys. We actually have some people talking and presenting from all over. If you guys are interested in that, I would highly recommend it. That is going to be one of the coolest SANS conferences you'll ever be to.
Yeah, and then just a shameless plug. Obviously, we are going to be running this class in Sydney in November, and so if you guys want to get more of these techniques and also get some better information, come see me in Sydney or in March in Singapore.
Absolutely. Tim is the man. Look at that mug.
Justin, someone's asking, where do they find the details for that, what's it called? SIEM
Summit? Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm going to real quickly throw that up. If you just search SANS SIEM Summit, it's the first link, but I'll grab it and throw it in the chat real quick too. Definitely would recommend Tim's class as well. Tim is doing fantastic. He's clearly passionate about this material. There we go. I just shared that in the chat window. but that's going to be a fantastic summit. And
Okay.
555 will also be taught after the 2-day summit. And Tim might be there too.
Awesome. Okay, I think that's it then. Thank you guys so much for your wonderful presentation and for bringing this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, visit sans.org/webcasts. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at asiapacific@sans.org. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS APAC webcast. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.